One. Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Paco Fabian with Our Revolution National. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and I'm here super excited to be with you guys in Minnesota tonight. We are going to have a really awesome call. We're going to get started here in just a few minutes. So please tell us your name and where you're from in the chat, what part of the state you're watching from, maybe if you're watching from another part of the country. It'd be great to see folks that are joining us where you guys are from. I'm happy to give you guys shout outs on that. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We have a real awesome opportunity to build a deep progressive bench of in Minnesota, and with your help, we can make that happen, right? We can make the Minneapolis City Council more progressive. We can put some progressives in different positions like the Board of Estimate and Taxation, and we can elect some people to the St. Paul School Board. So tonight, we're going to hear from some of these folks, and we're also going to be joined by State Attorney General Keith Ellison, who's going to help us put all this in perspective, right? What this election means for the people of the great state of Minnesota. And so with less than 3 weeks to go before the election is over, we'll share how you can get involved in the final push during early voting and through Election Day. We need each and every person helping us to get out the vote. So thank you for all of you that are joining us here tonight. Help us make Minnesota a state that's much more progressive and a beacon for our country, a beacon that it can be. So again, let us know where you're watching from. I'm going to check out the chat right now. See who we've got here with us tonight. I see we've got Eric from Plymouth, Minnesota. Nice to see you. Sylvia in St. Paul. Good to see you. We have Cheryl in Minneapolis. Liam and Antonio watching in Northeast Minneapolis, Ward 1. Good job, guys. Thanks for joining us tonight. I see Brian from Marshall in Southwest Minnesota. Bob Robbins from Inver Grove Heights. Mark Brack, who's part of Healthcare for All Minnesota. Good to see you. Roger from Faribault. Delicia from St. Paul. Lisa in Minneapolis. Andy in Seward. So many people joining us. So again, as we're building up our audience here, I want to urge you guys to check out the latest edition of the Revolution Report. It is our way of communicating what we're doing nationwide, right? Highlighting stories coming from different states, some of the stuff that's going on at the national level. And it also includes ways that you guys can plug into the work that we're doing. You can see the cover of our last, I don't want to say episode because it's not an episode, but of our last publication from our last week. We have Kristen Cinema on there. I think we all know who she is. So you can sign up in the link in the chat again. And also if you want to get involved with us, it's really important to remember that Our Revolution is 100% funded by you, our members. Over the past 5 years, we've become one of America's leading grassroots funded political action organizations. And together with all of you, we're working to deliver on progressive policies that can really make a change for the better in people's lives. So if you're already a member, thank you so much. We wouldn't be able to put on events like this without you. But if you're not a member yet, please consider joining. We're going to drop a link in the chat now. And you guys can become members. And if you do become a member and sign up today, let me know and I'll give you a shout out here today. So again, let me see who else has joined us since I started talking. We've got Diane just moved to Bloomington, but Minneapolis is in her heart. Good to see you, Diane. Alice is in South Minneapolis. We've got Janelle in Minneapolis. So great to see so many of you. And so we're going to get started here in just a couple minutes. And before I turn it over, just want to say thank you to all of you in Minnesota for helping us out to elect some of the folks we've elected previously, folks like Ilan Omar and some of the members of the Minneapolis State Senate and others. Kevin's going to talk a little bit about them in just a second. So it's now my pleasure to turn it over to Kevin Chavis, who is going to be your host for the evening. Kevin, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Paco. Welcome all revolutionaries out there. Hi, my name is Kevin Chavis. I'm the board of Our Revolution Minnesota and active with Twin Cities as well. So we've got an action-packed broadcast tonight, and we're so glad to have all of you tuning in with us. So this evening, we're going to hear from some of our endorsed candidates and elected officials like Attorney General Keith Ellison, Samantha Priestinson for Minneapolis Board of Estimates and Taxation, Jeremiah Ellison for Minneapolis City Council Ward 5, Elliot Payne for Minneapolis City Council Ward 1, and Uriah Ward for St. Paul School Board. But real quick, want to remind everyone to sign up at the link in the chat for the Revolution report emailed straight to your inbox every week. This is where we report critical insider information on the work we're doing to build grassroots power and bring change to Capitol Hill. It's also where you can plug in to take direct action in events around the country. And this is also how we get on the same page and fight together as a unified front against corporatists and other big money billionaires. So the link is in the chat. Also, before we get going, just know that Our Revolution is 100% funded by our members. So with your support, we've become America's leading grassroots funded organization. The link is in the chat as well. I think Paco mentioned in a bit. So this moment that we're in is extremely critical for our movement, and as the Build Back Better plan makes its way through Congress, it's been incredible to see progressive champions in DC really holding the line so we can deliver for working people, for families, and for our elders. We also know that a strong progressive bloc in Congress didn't just happen by accident. It didn't happen overnight. It was built and it took time. So congressional district by congressional district, state by state, and community by community. It's been a deliberate effort by all of us in the progressive movement, including Our Revolution, to build a bench of progressive champions at the local, state, and federal level. So at Our Revolution, it's also part of our winning kind of inside-outside strategy. So far in 2020 and 2021 election cycles, we've helped elect 44 progressives to Congress, including Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. That's been absolutely essential to us holding the line in DC right now. We've also put 195 progressives in state legislatures across the country, including Omar Fateh, John Marty, and Patricia Torres-Ray right here in the Minnesota State Senate. So that's going to help us get more progressive state laws on the books and build upward pressure for big wins we want to see here and around the country. But we know we need to be even stronger so we can fight for a living wage and healthcare for all and a Green New Deal. So that's why we're keeping pressure between electoral cycles like we did with the Revolution Recess this summer, and right now with the nationwide pickup tour to build support for the PRO Act, to get workers more power. And so we all know it starts at the local level. 2020 and 2021, more than 115 Our Revolution endorsed candidates at the local level were elected, and we're looking to add at least 4 more to the list from Minneapolis and St. Paul this November, and we're going to hear from some folks here shortly. Before we get going, again, just going to remind folks that we're 100% grassroots funded, and we're the largest grassroots funded organization in the country, so with your help, our work can continue to grow in strength. We're also delivering new results, and we're hoping you'll make a recurring investment with Our Revolution by signing up to become a member right now. Again, the link is in the chat. So first off, we are honored to have Minnesota Attorney General and Our Revolution board member Keith Ellison here with us tonight. We've been talking about building a bench of progressive champions, and Attorney General Keith Ellison is Exhibit A for why we need progressives in the judicial branch. It's one way to stop deadly abuse by law enforcement, because no one should have to suffer like George Floyd, Philando Castile, and their families have. Every Minnesotan, every American owes a debt of gratitude to Attorney General Ellison for helping deliver justice for the murder of George Floyd. Before he served Minnesotans as the people's lawyer, Attorney General Ellison represented them in Congress, serving as the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which he actually helped build to 100 members. So Attorney General Ellison, welcome. And just going to ask a question, looking back at how progressive movement has kind of been built over the last decades. What do you see as the connection between electing progressives to local office and kind of the big picture we're looking at here?
Well, the closest unit of government is local government. The closest unit of government to the people is local government. If you don't have a solid progressive base at school board, city council, board of estimation and taxation, park board, then what you don't have is a solid foundation. You know, I was in Congress for 12 years, and I can absolutely assure you that if all we have is a bunch of progressives in Congress, then we don't have legs to stand on to push that national policy. We need some folks who are going to do the things at the city council that needs to be done, like pass effective housing policy that will give everybody an opportunity to have a solid place to live, a place of dignity and respect, not a tent city, not a place where people are poorly housed. And so I'm proud of our progressives fighting on the grassroots level on housing policy in a country where we have a monumental housing crisis. But also on wages, wage theft, local ordinances, fighting wage theft, insisting that proper wages be paid to workers, environmental action. That's dump site is in a certain location. It's in a place. It's not in the sky and it's not theoretical. It is on a street with an address. And that means local leaders, like our revolution panelists on tonight, are the ones who are going to be on the very forefront of protecting people from toxic waste, bad water, the transfer stations, all of these kind of things. So to answer your question very directly, the leaders like Pramila Jayapal, leaders like Ilhan Omar, these folks started at the local level. They didn't start in Congress. They started in city councils and school boards and state legislative jobs. So I think that's a long answer to your question, Kevin, but the link is inextricable and it's absolutely essential.
Absolutely. I just want to ask, first off, if you do have questions for any of our panelists, please put it in the chat for folks, and I will we'll check in to see how that's going. I do have one other question for you, Attorney General. So we have time for some questions. So Minnesota has a long tradition of progressive politics going back actually to the 1800s, but a lot has really changed in that time. So where do you see the progressive movement's new possibilities here in Minnesota and now and beyond?
I see the progressive movement in a critical juncture, quite honestly. I mean, we've seen progressives really winning on a number of fronts. We've seen progressives really be the critical voice in the U.S. Congress. I'm so proud to have helped build up the Progressive Caucus, and it's great to see Pramila leading that great body of legislators right now. But where we are really now is that, quite frankly, the progressives used to be the leading voice confronting the far right. Now, sometimes we find ourselves having to convince some of our liberal friends. And I don't want to be polarizing, but I do think it is important to just keep it clear that our voices are more needed now than ever. It is the progressives in Congress who are saying we need a real, Build Back Better bill, not a watered down, weakened one that strips away critical things that Americans need. It is the progressives who are fighting harder for Biden's budget than he's fighting for himself. And thank God they're doing it. It was progressives like Cori Bush who was out there demanding that they take action on the eviction moratorium. And progressives now, our country, and I'll just say our country, is at a critical juncture where some people would rather cling to a unsatisfactory status quo than reach for a better, brighter future, which being the future is inherently uncertain, but holds greater possibility than the moment that we're in. So I just want to say that progressives have got to show real courage now. Keep on saying we need peace. here and abroad. We have the right to both public safety and civil and human rights, making the case that, actually, we really do need a Green New Deal. We got forest fires all across our country. At one point, are we going to say, this status quo of being oil dependent and fossil fuel dependent really isn't working for the earth or any of us? Time to grab for a green future in a real constructive way on policing. Time to say that we're going to take a bold step forward because the status quo isn't that great. I remember, and some of the folks around my age will remember, Lillian Weiss and Lloyd Smalley were killed in a botched police raid in Minneapolis. Then Tycel Nelson was shot in the back by a police officer, Don May, back in 1991. My son Jeremiah was 2 years old at the time. And then, years go by, Terrence Franklin, Philando Castile, all these things. And now our city is confronted with the opportunity to have a bolder, better future where we really focus on safety and human rights. And some people know that the status quo isn't good, but they're afraid to grab for it. And we, the progressive movement, need to be the ones to be ready to grab for a better future and assure everybody that beyond this moment of decision are better days, greater unity, more safety, more human rights, greater prosperity for everybody. And so that's where I think we are. And I think we've got to gird up our loins, get tough, and keep on punching. This is not the time to weaken, to water down our politics. This is the time to make the case stronger. Because if you talk directly to people and you knock the doors and you make the calls and you listen to people, what you'll find is that they do want change. But they just want to make sure that, that they understand, that they feel part of things. Now is the time for patience and persistence, both at the same time. And we can do that. And we need to listen and be humble, but also be resolute that we can do better as a society.
Absolutely. And that actually gets to our next point. I'll get to that in a minute, but I just want to thank you, Attorney General Ellison, for being here and for being a leader on the national board and overseeing the work all over the country in keeping the progressive movement going that Bernie started. Any final thoughts before I jump into?
I just want to thank all the panelists who put their name on the ballot. Let me just say this. Whether you are a far-right conservative or a progressive like we are, the Trump years were traumatic for the country. No matter what your political philosophy was, you open up the newspaper or turn on the tube and it's like, what did that nut say today? It was traumatic and destabilizing and anxiety-inducing. And then we have the pandemic, and that threw people into a tremendous state of unease, and we had a recession for working people induced by the pandemic, not to mention massive loss of life and grieving. And then George Floyd, murder on the streets in full view of the world. All these things coupled together induce a lot of anxiety. The time is now for a clear vision for an inclusive Minneapolis, Minnesota, and for bold leaders to stand up. If you find yourself in a tough election because you stood up for what's right, stood up for housing, stood up for safety, stood up for human rights, then you should be honored to be in that battle. It is a blessing and an honor to be fought by people who want to cling to an unsatisfactory, unfair status quo. But just keep on punching, don't back down, and call, knock, and don't give up talking to people until the very last second after the polls close. And remind people that if you get in line before 8, you can still vote, even if you don't get to the poll until after. So, but this is the time. This is a gut check time. This is the time to work. This is the time to show what you're really made of. And the win. Hopefully, we win every race. But the real fight is to be committed to engaging people. That's the real race we're in. I know I'm committed, and I know all of you committed. So congratulations to our candidates who put their names on the ballot in a time of trouble to help their city, to help their state, Bless you guys, and I'm with you all the way. And I'll stick around to listen to the program. God bless. And there's my son Jeremiah. Hey Jeremiah, how you doing? Good to see y'all. And but let me welcome everybody and greet everybody who's on there. Take care now.
Excellent, thank you, Attorney General. And that gets us to our next point. I just want to mention we're going to have our Elect Progressives rally in Dornoch, where we're going to talk about every candidate on the ballot throughout Minneapolis, including Samantha, our next guest. But this rally is going to include Attorney General Keith Ellison, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Council Member Philippe Cunningham, and Council Member Jeremiah Ellison. It's at Cleveland Park, Sunday, October 24th, 1 p.m. It's a rally, and then at Dornoch afterwards. So if you want to take action, get out the vote. This is one of those we're going to be hosting here shortly. So my next up, we have Samantha Priestinson, candidate for Minneapolis Board of Estimates and Taxation. So Samantha Priestinson is a working class mother of 3 sons and a small business owner. She's a resident of Northeast Minneapolis and has lived in the city for more than 20 years. She has deep roots in the community, coaching soccer, volunteering in local schools, and she's also familiar with the struggles of working people of Minneapolis as a renter, dealing with neglectful landlords and rising rents. She served in the U.S. Army as a combat medic and has a background in healthcare, where she drove diversity and inclusion metrics for women of color in the field. So thank you, Samantha, for joining us.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you perfect. Thank you. And I'm going to start with the first question. Many people may be unfamiliar with the Minneapolis Board of Estimate and Taxation. So can you explain to people what the BOE does and why it's so important?
Yes. So there are 3 primary responsibilities of the Board of Estimate and Taxation, one of which is setting our levies. One of them funds our general fund, which is our city budget. And then you have others that are specific to the Parks Board, as well as some pensions. So firefighters, for example, police, for example. A second responsibility is bonding, which essentially in a nutshell is think of a city taking out a loan. So some projects that you might be familiar with in which we needed bonding would be Upper Harbor Terminal, to get the roads and to get the lines buried, stuff like that in the first phase. Stadiums, which people are familiar with, of which the U.S. Bank Stadium, we have started to have to pay on that debt in June. So that's of a concern, but that bonding process. And the third thing is community engagement. And I would almost argue it's the most important. Why? When we're doing our voter engagement, we are finding out that most people do not know what the Board of Estimate and Taxation is. It is not new. It's a down ballot race. It's nonpartisan, so you won't see a party associated on the ballot line for any of the 4 candidates. There are also 2 smaller responsibilities, which is to prepare Appendix A of the budget and to look at the convention center events and determine which ones are eligible to collect taxes on. It does not create policy. You don't have an office. You don't get 6 figures. You get paid for the 10 to 12 meetings a year. That happen for the Board of Estimate and Taxation. And it's also important to know who's on this board. I like to say that this is a true seat of the people. And the reason I say that is because you're sitting on a board of people that are already elected. So you will have your mayor, your council president, the chair of Ways and Means. And so for those of you that don't know what that is, any money that comes in and out of our city has to go through that committee to get it approved before it goes to the full council for a vote. And then you have a representative of one of the commissioners from the Parks Board, and then the 2 elected seats from the public who are not already serving in an elected capacity. So I like to say that it is a true seat of the people in that way. And so community engagement is critical and going to continue to be critical, not just the way in which we engage with people, right? You'll get elected officials that I like to say they act brand new. It depends on which ward. We have 13 wards in our city. It depends on where they're going, how they speak to people. We have to get away from that. We have to speak authentically and keep consistent, transparent messaging when we're engaging with the public. We need to make sure that we lift up their voice and bring it into the Hall of Power, which is City Hall, and that their voice is implemented within our processes. And we also have to be inclusive where we have meetings, the time that we have meetings, make sure that we're accessible for people that are hearing impaired or vision impaired or have some other physical disability. As somebody who's bilingual and also speaks Spanish, that's another plus that I have in recognizing the importance of making sure that anybody and everybody can participate, not just in the language that they're comfortable, but with whatever limitations that they may have, so that we make sure that everybody is engaged on not only what this is, but how our money works for us. Because while I'm a progressive transformational leader, we also have to remember that again, not everybody has access to this information, and our money doesn't have a political party. Our money is our money, and it's either invested in us or we waste money by throwing it at the perceived problems, which is what we've been doing in our city for quite some time.
All right, excellent. Thank you for that background and why you jumped in as your to start your campaign for Board of Estimates, something that not many people have been aware of. So want to quick ask Henry, are there any questions, Q&A in the chat? If you do have any questions for Samantha or any of our panelists, please put them in the chat. I can ask a quick one here we wrote about. So something important to your campaign, we talk a lot about institutional systemic barriers to fair and equal access to opportunities and funding. So what can you do as a member of the Board of Estimate and Taxation to kind of help break down these barriers?
When you empower people with information, that is a powerful tool. A lot of people, Attorney General Ellison alluded to this, a lot of people are traumatized and they feel, they don't feel empowered.
I think she's got, are you back? I think your computer froze, unless it's just my screen.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you came back. You were gone for a second. Go ahead.
Okay. I would say another thing that is important here specifically about how I will work is that I've had the pleasure of working with Elliot Payne, who I'm supporting in the election. I live in his ward, but we've worked on policy together from when I was a senior policy advisor for Councilmember Cunningham. I've worked to create departments and help him to create the Office of Violent Prevention and Intervention. I've worked with Councilmember Ellison. So I've worked not just with city staff, but also with our progressive officials already. So I don't have that learning curve of having to build authentic relationships with the people that work at the city, as well as our elected officials. There's a hitting the ground running that I think is critical and important. And I would be remiss to say if there isn't something important about having representation that is reflective of the most marginalized people that they are serving. And that isn't something that we've had until more recent on a consistent basis. And it is important. It's important for our children. I put a billboard up today, I'll say quickly, in 2 locations. And one of the things that brought tears to my eyes is how many children will pass by that billboard and look and see that there is a Black woman up there that is confident, that is doing something that a lot of people feel is not attainable, or that they've been disenfranchised out of, and say, I can do that, I could be that. What is that? And that is important to me as a young girl that was raised in South Central and actually lived through an uprising and riots and the trauma through that. I understand how important it is to see those elect leaders. I know I said I'll make it real quick. I have one more thing to say that's relevant to this. When I was 11, which is the age of my youngest son, my grandmother was going to pick up her check back when you had to go pick up a check for disability or other things. And they were about to burn the office down because people wanted their money. They needed their money. And it was Representative Maxine Waters that was standing on a milk crate on a megaphone, and you could probably find this on YouTube. And she was speaking to us about working with her. She's going to make sure everybody gets their check. She was informing people about what was going to happen next. And she was keeping them calm while also standing there as a strong advocate. And I was fortunate to be there in Brooklyn Center when she came and did the same exact thing when we were out there advocating for another loss of a community member. So having that representation is wildly important. And I don't think that it's an accident that I'm here right now in this space doing this and working with everybody in our community every day outside of even the election to make sure that our money works for us and that we start investing in futures.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for being here, Samantha, and glad we can help you throughout the whole city of Minneapolis get you elected this November.
Thank you so much for your support and for everybody watching.
Excellent. And so, so just want to double make sure folks know. So as we work to transform the party and deliver progressive change, we need to continue to keep growing our membership here at Our Revolution. We're 100% grassroots funded, and that helps us continue the work. So please consider signing up to be a recurring donor to keep our momentum going, because this is a long-term fight. We wanna win things, and it's gonna take a while, and some things will win soon, and some things will take longer. So we need to continue to build a progressive bench. So next up, we have another member of the Ellison family. Jeremiah Ellison is running for re-election for Minneapolis City Council. He's represented Ward 5 on the council since 2017, and during his time in office has co-authored the city's tenant protection ordinance, which put a cap on how much landlords could charge for security deposits. He also helped build more affordable housing in Minneapolis North Side, and has helped reimagine community safety beyond just the police-only model, starting with a police policy to shift non-emergency calls away from the police. And I also see that it's your birthday in the coming week, next week, so a happy early birthday, Jeremiah. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent, thank you. And can start with the first question here. Can you and folks, if you have any questions for Councilmember Ellison, please put them in the chat. So can you share any promising anecdotes about how Minneapolis has shifted away from a police-only approach to community safety, establishing the new Office of Violence Prevention, how that's playing out, and your thoughts going forward?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We always experience change. Whenever we experience change, it never happens in this, clean, orderly way, right? Because there are certain people who benefit from things the way they are. And when George Floyd was murdered, some of us had been working, that sense of urgency that George Floyd's murder instilled in a lot of people across the country. Some of us had that sense of urgency since we were kids, right? Far before the murder of George Floyd. But we felt everybody sort of take on this level of urgency when we had to witness those 9 minutes, right? And so when I first got into the council, I was sworn in 2018. We got right to work trying to make sure that we were expanding mental health response, to make sure that we were addressing some of the abuses happening within the department. We had officers who were caught injecting people with ketamine. Our department was caught lying about the number of untested rape kits they had. We had a drug bust that was so rife with racial bias that our district attorney at the time, current district attorney, wouldn't even prosecute it. And Mike Freeman's not the most progressive guy, right? When we're talking about progressive prosecution. And so some of us have been noticing the problems from the very beginning. During the unrest, a lot was going on. This was after the murder of George Floyd. But one of the things that occurred was that in the absence of what people were used to, in the absence of an adequate and full police presence, communities came together. Communities came together to patrol their own neighborhoods, Some of those patrols, some of those community patrols were armed. Many of them were not armed. And all of them were effective in helping to prevent fires, helping to put out fires, helping to provide mutual aid, helping to make sure that people had groceries when grocery stores were shutting down or were boarded up. This is what we saw in those days after the murder of George Floyd. We saw community coming together. And while it was always going to be unsustainable, it gave us a little bit of a glimpse into how we can keep each other safe as neighbors. And to me, the conversation that we need to be having is exactly that. It's not really a conversation of yes or no to police, more or less police. It's a conversation of how do we keep each other safe in Minneapolis? How do we keep each other safe in this country? That's the conversation that we need to be having. And anybody who is being honest with themselves can take a quick look at history and realize that it's not only the past 2 years that have been really tragic in terms of gun violence in our country, but in places like North Minneapolis, we have carried the burden of gun violence in this city far beyond that, for decades, right? We have carried the burden of gun violence. So when the rest of Minneapolis was looking at downward trends in violent crime, it was people in North Minneapolis who were still going to funerals, who were still holding vigils, who were still hearing gunshots at night. And so when we look at this system, we're not just trying to change something in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. We're trying to change a dynamic where some communities are okay with, where some communities are deemed okay to carry the burden of violence, and other communities don't have to carry that burden. And so I'm happy to be moving in the direction that we're moving in.
Excellent. Thank you again for running for office. That's part of how we can make change, stepping up when we can. So again, I want to ask, are there any questions in the chat, Henry?
All right, there is no specific question for Jeremiah yet, but there was an earlier question that any of the panelists, our local panelists, can answer if they'd like, if they think they have an answer for regarding funding of building of sports stadiums or subsidizing them in any way. Do you feel you have any power or anything you can do to stop the funding of sports stadiums, paying for this funding of sports stadiums or subsidizing their rebuilding, what have you, as in the Viking Stadium? I'm sure this is a reference to that, paying for that.
You know, I know that the funding of the Viking Stadium precedes my time in office, but there's been whispers of, you know, maybe the Timberwolves wanting a new arena or the like. Those are not going to be things that I'm supporting. I think that especially right now, especially when we're dealing with a recession brought on by this pandemic, we need to be investing every single dollar that we have into working class people in Minneapolis, into stabilizing people in their homes, into making sure that people not only get reemployed, but get reemployed at the same rate, with the same hours, with the same benefits, because that's been an issue in our city as well. We need that anyway. We need that even when it's not a recession, but especially now, I don't see how anybody could justify putting public money towards big shiny objects like that.
I would add on real quickly as well, back to the last point I was making around that community engagement. A lot of people don't realize that we've started paying on that stadium starting in June, and they don't realize that there really isn't any return on investment other than jobs creation. But as Councilmember Ellison was saying, quality jobs, the treatment of people on jobs, the payment that they're getting, are they unionized or not? Like, all of those things are relevant and important. But what's key, and that's something that I can do in my role, is out doing that community engagement to explain to people what happens now, what does this payment schedule look like, so that people understand the impact and the outcomes of making these investments that are true investments in the community, and that community has no ownership in. There's no cooperative piece of that. And so that education, I think, will go far to prevent, because one of the most powerful tools that we have is when people are informed, they will show up. They will write emails, they will call, they will show up at the meetings, and they will show up in large number when they know what is at stake, and they're informed about the waste that has occurred that often they're unaware of. And with all of the tragedies that have occurred in our city, this is one that's kind of fallen by the wayside because of all the other things. And it's something definitely that we have to start speaking about again and inform people about what comes next now that we are paying back on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Completely agreed. All these things are connected, and the mistakes that maybe elected officials made in the past, we're still paying for them now. Absolutely. I want to thank again Jeremiah Ellison for being here. We want to support you in your re-election. We look forward to helping re-elect you at our Elect Progressives rally in Dornoch on Sunday, October 24th for Get Out the Vote. So look forward to seeing you there.
I look forward to seeing all of you there as well. I did see one question come in about a minute ago about addressing increases in crime. Would I be able to take 2 minutes to address that real quick?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So I think that one is we have to expand how we're addressing violence in our communities. I think that's one thing that we need to be doing. The other thing that I think is important to acknowledge in answering that question is we have to ask ourselves what creates violence in our community, because I think that we don't spend enough time answering that question, and thus we can't actually vet whether our current strategies are working. And I think that what we'll find if we ask ourselves these questions is that our current strategies aren't working. And I don't mean that they're not working now. I mean that they've never really worked. So case in point, if you take any given city and you break them down to, per 100,000, and I'll try to make this quick, right? You can make any two cities basically the same size when you're measuring per 100,000. So you take the city of Chicago, for example, right? A beautiful city that I love and visit pretty often, so I don't want to pick on them. But if you take the city of Chicago and you take the city of Minneapolis and you look at both cities per 100,000, you're going to see that in the city of Chicago has about 450 police officers per 100,000. And the city of Minneapolis has about 155 police officers per 100,000. That's even with the reduced numbers. But what you also find is that the city of Chicago has about 85 homicides per 100,000, and the city of Minneapolis has about 19. Both, in my mind, are tragic figures, but they also speak for themselves when you talk about, when you're trying to say, does having a high number of police per person equal a lower number of homicides per person? And the answer is no, it doesn't, right? So if we know that that's not necessarily the one-to-one ratio that we're looking for, then we have to ask ourselves, what will create that, right? To me, it's about intervention and it's about upstream solutions. And we have to do both at the same time. Because in the past, what we've always done is we've always said, yes, we'll do upstream the second that we have handled the crisis in front of us. The only problem is the crisis in front of us never feels handled. So we never invest upstream. And the cycle just perpetuates itself. We don't create safe communities, and we don't end up solving the problem or changing our systems. So just wanted to put that out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, we definitely need to take a look at all the metrics. I mean, it's not working. It clearly hasn't worked for a while. So thank you again, and we look forward to being at the rally in Dornoch for you in a couple of weeks. Actually, less than 10 days. So next, we're going to be hearing from Elliot Payne, who is also running for Minneapolis City Council, challenging Ward 1 incumbent. Elliot grew up in Milwaukee, the son of a Black Panther, and learned early on the power of organizing for a better world. He moved to the Twin Cities for college and has lived in the city's Northeast since 2005. With a background in mechanical engineering, he has advised the city of Minneapolis, the Office of Performance and Innovation, where he worked with the city council on policies to protect renters from evictions. And he also has a bunch of endorsements, including from Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and groups like the SEIU, Sierra Club. He's DFL endorsed, and of course, Our Revolution. So welcome, Elliot.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for being here, and thanks for stepping up to run for office. You've had an interesting perspective, kind of first working with city government and now running for office. So as someone who has seen how city government functions from the inside, what possibilities do you see for progressive policies in Minneapolis that could be replicated elsewhere?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've seen, it's people like Sam that you meet when you're working on the inside. And people like Sam are all over the place inside City Hall. And, you know, in the specific instance, me and Sam were able to work together to get some renter protections passed through City Council. And there's all these other people that, you know, if Sam wasn't running right now, she would be kind of, you know, nameless, faceless city staffer. And it's hard to separate out those one nameless, faceless city staffer from the other. And there's some that are really committed to the progressive vision that we want. And there are some that are very committed to stopping that progressive vision. And so one of the things that we're recognizing now in a more contemporary era, because that was a while ago that me and Sam were working together, is things like the Roof Depot site, where there was a report that was held back that somebody who was probably really fighting for a progressive vision for our city wrote out a report around how they could go forward with this project. And then it doesn't get unearthed until after the fact, and now people can't make voting decisions with this progressive vision shared out. And so there's a lot of these kind of dusty old reports that are sitting around City Hall that have really thoughtful plans and very progressive policies that are not seen by anyone, and they're not being a part of the policymaking process. And so I think one of the things that we can do is, as elected people, is really identify who are those staffers that are really working towards our progressive goals, and how do we give them that permission structure to be bold in pursuing those actions so that we can elevate those policies in a way that can now become those national models.
Absolutely. Yes. And then I just want to ask Henry, are there any questions in the chat? And folks can ask any question in the chat.
There is. I have a question. This is for anybody who feels that they can answer it. It's more or less a myth about the Minneapolis police officers being paid much less than other officers in the suburbs and towns around the Twin Cities and Minnesota. Is that true, or what is happening there?
I will say this, is I don't know the exact numbers, so I'm not going to say it's false, but I will make an informed opinion based on what I know. And what I do know is that the Police Federation is a union, and they get to collective bargain. And if they weren't making the amount that they thought that they should make, it would have come up in their contract negotiations, which it has not. So we're able, with the information I know at the moment, I'm able to have a response that is an educated response based on their response to their collective bargain.
All right, Samantha froze again. Anybody else have any input on that? That was a really good answer, though.
Thank you.
And there might be another question here. I'll just read it as it is, and rather than trying to summarize it. There needs to be a serious role for seniors in teacher, community public safety. The existing system warehouses and kills off and disrespects. I'm a retired chemical dependency treatment counselor. I'm a longtime activist in community violence issues. I'm a queer elder mentoring queer youth. I could work part-time in an official role with a community violence rubric if we get rid of the current terrible MPD monopoly. And that is from Alice Ballroom, if I'm reading that correctly.
I can jump in on this one. So one of the projects I'm working on in City Hall is helping to launch the mental health team. And this is as part of that Safety for All budget that passed with the help of Jeremiah Ellison. And, you know, the vision of this is that we can identify those types of interventions that would be better handled by people that have the kind of experience. And one of the things that actually brought me into wanting to run for office was this kind of personal reflection of the progressive vision that we're fighting for is a generational fight. And tapping into some of the energy from my parents is what's made me realize that this was the path that I wanted to go on. And I'm sure Jeremiah probably feels the same way. And of course, when you're younger, you don't want to have anything to do with your parents. And then as you mature, you start saying, oh, they were onto something and I need to look into this. And I think listening to our elders, following in their footsteps, building off of the progress that our elders have made is going to be core to being able to build this vision out, because I don't think that we can recreate the wheel here when we have such strong leadership that we can follow on. And I think part of what I'm so excited about the potential for the Department of Public Safety is creating the conditions for those types of interventions in our community.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can definitely learn from our elders, and it should be, there shouldn't be so much ageism in our society. I think people fall into that all too often, including in progressive circles sometimes. So thank you so much, Elliot, for running for office, looking to support you more. We will be hosting additional events other than the one in North. We will be coming to Northeast at some time soon. So keep posted. And want to remind folks really quick to become a member today. Again, we're going to put the link in the chat to become a member of the National. But finally, we really want to hear from Uriah Ward, who's running for St. Paul School Board. And Uriah is an educator, a community organizer, and lives on the east side of St. Paul. And Uriah was the longest serving organizer on the very successful Vote for St. Paul Kids campaign in 2018. That campaign that he was a part of won an investment of $18.6 million a year for 10 years for St. Paul Public Schools. He works currently as a financial aid counselor at Augsburg University, where he initiated and was a leader in the drive to unionize staff. He stands against efforts to privatize education and has been endorsed by the St. Paul DFL, St. Paul Federation of Educators, Local 28, AFSCME, OPIU Local 12, so a lot of labor organizations and many others. So welcome, Uriah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here tonight.
Excellent. Glad you can be here. And so like I mentioned before, you've got a lot of support from organized labor behind your campaign. So why is it important to have pro-union progressives in place in local school boards?
Yeah, this is really, really critical, especially because I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure that most of y'all probably noticed a couple of years ago we had a strike in St. Paul Public Schools, the first one for a really, really long time, and that was incredibly disruptive for our district. That's not to say I didn't support it. I was out walking the picket line with my friends who are members of SPFE, and I did support the strike, and they were fighting to make sure our schools were where they needed what we need them to be. Whenever we elect school board members, these are people who are charged with making sure that our districts are bargaining in good faith, are making sure that we are cultivating good working environments for our teachers. Because if we don't do a good job making sure that we're taking care of our staff that work with our students, they're not going to be able to do a good job. We're not going to be able to retain them. It was really important for me as someone who is, who's been in the labor movement. I helped to start the union at Augsburg University. I'm currently serving on the bargaining team. I have a bargaining session tomorrow morning. I know the kind of work that we put in, trying to make sure that we are connecting with our members, making sure that we are representing what they are feeling, what they need, trying to address some serious issues around turnover, around really poor wages frankly at our institution. If people don't come into the space willing to engage with our workers, then we're not going to do a good job meeting their needs. And so I'm really excited that I've been able to run with union support, and I hope that I'll be able to serve on the board and govern in collaboration and co-governance with all of the workers that make our schools so amazing for our kids.
Absolutely. So yes, we need pro-worker folks elected at all offices, local level on up. So thank you for that. I'm a member of AFSCME and then previously SEIU, so it means a lot. So the next question, school boards are increasingly a target of the right wing, especially the ed reform movement, but also some really pernicious conservatives. So who are fighting things like critical race theory, even though they know nothing about it. What can and should progressive activists like ourselves be doing to kind of push back on their agenda?
Yeah, I mean, we need, and this is really important. You know, it's not enough to elect progressives as school board. The progressive activists need to show up too. You know, we need people to show up to school board meetings and talk about how important it is to have a curriculum that reflects the diversity of our district. We need to have people coming to board meetings talking about how we should keep people safe, you know, and how masking and vaccinations are beneficial to making sure that we have a district that can better serve our students and do a better job keeping people safe. And this is true for any level of government, but especially with everything going on with school boards right now, we need to show up, more than they're showing up. St. Paul, I think, fortunately, is better off than some of our suburban neighbors in terms of like who comes up to the school board meetings. But at the same time, as someone who potentially would be able to serve on the board, it's a lot easier to make the progressive argument whenever we have the community coming out demanding it. And so I hope that after the election, people will stay engaged.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I've been to some school board meetings, and it's much better to have a lot of folks there supporting an issue than you being alone. So thank you for running and stepping up for office, Uriah. I know you have an event next Tuesday, fundraiser. We shared that on our Facebook page, so we'll make sure to get folks out there. So thank you again, Uriah, for stepping up for local office.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
And so next, I want to jump to just mention that we have a whole host of other elected and for re-election or new time candidates that we have endorsed for local office that include folks that have been endorsed by national. Some have been endorsed by local groups like Our Revolution Minnesota and Our Revolution Twin Cities. That includes Cam Gordon in Ward 2, Philippe Cunningham in Ward 4, Nick Core in Ward 7, Aisha Chugtai in the open seat in Ward 10. That's where I live, so I'm supporting Aisha. Jeremy Schrader, and Andrew Johnson as well. So if you go to the next slide, there's a whole host of other local elected officials that we're supporting too, that we think are super important for folks to know about. Flip your ballot over and vote for some of these folks running for park board, including Londell French. He's running citywide, so just like with Samantha for Board of Estimate and Taxation, also vote for Londell. Anyone in Minneapolis can vote for Londell. And then there are specific candidates for park board districts as well: Eric Moran, AK Hassan, Charles Rogers, Arisa Husted. And then we also have folks running in St. Paul, like Uriah, and then Jim Leutner in St. Louis Park City Council Ward 3. And don't forget, we also have really critical, important ballot endorsements. Question number 2 in Minneapolis is to basically put the police under the Office of Public Safety rather than being their own department with their own rules in the charter. And the city council and the city have much more say over what public safety can look like beyond just a police-only model. And then both Minneapolis and St. Paul are going to be voting on rent control. Minneapolis has a system that's going to go to the city council. So who we elect to the city council will decide what that rent control looks like if we pass that. And that's question number 3. And then in St. Paul, yes for rent stabilization. And you can check out, we're going to send an email out and have links to some of these campaigns so folks can find out more information. That will come out next week, Tuesday. And don't forget, we again have the Elect Progressives Rally in Dornoch on Sunday, October 24th, 1 p.m. at Cleveland Park. That's the corner of Russell Avenue North and 33rd Avenue North. So that, again, is going to be with Attorney General Keith Ellison, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, and Council members Cunningham and Ellison will all be there. Next, want to make sure folks know their status. Are you registered to vote in Minnesota? Do you know who's on your ballots? You can go to mnvotes.org to find all that information out. Actually, you can take a look at your ballot ahead of time, right there, see who your elected officials are, all that right through the Secretary of State website, mnvotes.org. And last but not least, just want to thank everyone for being here. Thank everyone for stepping up for office. Thanks everyone that's going to volunteer and donate to these really important critical campaigns, because these local elections matter. They make a big difference. They impact you a lot more than even what's happening in DC, because we see we need to build a bench of progressives that will get to DC to actually fight for us, but we also need to see wins at the local level on up. So thank you for everyone here, and for folks that have been at these meetings, we end our meetings with a chant. So we usually chant when we organize, we win. For folks in SEIU, we chant this all the time as well. So if folks can unmute themselves, we will try this. It can be a little difficult with Zoom, but let's try anyways, because it's important that we are in solidarity with one another and we continue to organize and win. So I'll start. When we organize,
we win.
When we organize,
we win.
when we organize,
we win.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your evening.